What's up, home bartenders? Today we're taking a deep dive into sherry wine. Okay, so if you're like I was a couple years ago, you're probably thinking to yourself, sherry, isn't that what Fraser drinks?
Sherry, Niles? Thank you. Sherry, Niles?
But fear not, that's why we're here today. We're going to demystify sherry, we're gonna break it down, talk about the different types of grapes used, the different styles, dry versus sweet, and more importantly, how to use it in cocktails. Let's do it. What is sherry? Sherry is a fortified wine from the Jerez region of Spain. So fortified wines are wines that have been enhanced by a distilled spirit, usually brandy, and this boosts their alcoholic content and also adds some complexity of flavor. Some examples of fortified wines are port, vermouth, and of course, sherry. Types of sherry grapes. So Palomino Fino is the most common type of grape used in sherry, and it's responsible for the dry sherries. On the other hand, we have the Pedro Ximénez grape, PX, and that one is responsible for the sweeter sherries. These grapes are sun-dried, so it concentrates the sugar content and results in a much sweeter product. The third kind is the Muscatel grape, and it's a lot less common, and therefore I wasn't able to find any, so we're just going to ignore that one for today. But it's definitely the least used grape in sherries. Let's talk about dry sherries. So the Palomino grape is responsible for the dry sherries, all of the sherries you see here, but the aging process, that's what gives us the different styles, the different colors and complexities of these sherries. So our first is Fino sherry. This is probably the driest of the dry sherries. And this one here is organically aged. When it's fermenting in a barrel, a layer of yeast forms on top of the liquid. This is called the floor. The floor protects the sherry from the air, so it doesn't oxidize because oxygen is not able to penetrate the liquid. So this results in a more gentle aging. As you can tell, the color is not affected and the taste stays brighter and fresher. So Fino sherry. It's light, it's crisp in flavor. It is dry, it's very dry. There's a slight kind of saltiness to it. It's very nice. It's very, if you like a dry wine to sip on, very nice. Next up we have the Manzanilla sherry. The process is nearly identical between a Manzanilla and a Fino. Basically where it differs is regionally where it is being made. Some are made closer to sea level, some are made more inland, and that just the difference in climate can produce a different flavor, but let's give it a taste. I've actually never tried this Manzanilla. It's ever so slightly richer than the Fino, but very, very similar. There's a bit more of that kind of slight oiliness and saltiness. I wonder if this one is actually made closer to the ocean. I wonder if that impacts it. So moving completely to the other end of our selection here is Oloroso sherry.
Fraser is going to split a case of Oloroso with me because we both like Oloroso, but he's not here, so I'll stop bothering you. Nice chatting.
Now, Oloroso sherry is aged using oxidative aging. So basically it doesn't develop that floor, that yeast layer. And the reason for that is the alcohol content is a little higher. Anything above 16% will not develop a floor. Anything below 16% will develop a floor. So Oloroso does not. That means that it is being impacted by the air, by oxygen, and that is affecting the color, the flavor. As you can tell, it's a much richer, deeper color, and it's gonna give us a much richer flavor. It's still gonna be dry, because these are all dry sherries. Yeah, so it's still dry, but that nuttiness and those dried fruits really comes through. You get kind of a walnut, dried figs or raisins, like just dried fruit in general. Much richer flavor in an Oloroso. Very nice though. In the middle of Fino and Oloroso, we have Amontillado. Amontillado is kind of a mix of both. What happens here is it starts its life as a Fino sherry, aging under that floor, but then over time the floor dissipates and naturally goes away, at which point air is able to penetrate and start aging and oxidizing the sherry, and you end up with a blend essentially, which is the Amontillado sherry. So it starts off, it has the same kind of brightness and crispness that the Fino has, or the Manzanilla, but then it finishes with with that richness and nuttiness of the Oloroso, just not as intense. So yeah, it really is basically just a blend of the two. Finally, we have the Palo Cortado. I was actually gonna skip this one but I found one at the last minute, which happens to be the most expensive bottle I have here, like double. But hey, I figured let's just try it out and see how it is. So the Palo Cortado is technically an Amontillado. It has the same process where it starts as a Fino and then the floor dissipates and it becomes, or it starts aging like an Oloroso. But what happens here is that the floor dissipates early, like too early. So it spends less time aging organically like a Fino and then more time aging like an Oloroso. And traditionally this used to happen by accident, and they would just be like, oh, look at that, our Amontillado just became a Palo Cortado. Nowadays with, they're able to control it a lot more, so they know kind of why and when it happens. It's science, right?
Yes, science!
But anyways, so it's a more rare type because it kind of happens by accident. But this is the Palo Cortado. Kind of what you'd expect. I mean, it is well placed between the Amontillado and the Oloroso, but it does have a nice crispness is still there, nice freshness, but then it gets a really nice richness afterwards. Yeah, that's a really nice one. So all of these are going to be pretty great if you like sipping on dry fortified wines. If, on the other hand, you have a sweet tooth and you prefer kind of those like a port, I haven't had too much port to be honest, but the ones I have had are quite sweet. So if you do like that sweeter fortified wine, this next category is going to be for you. Let's take a look at sweet sherries. All right, so on the sweeter side of things, we have the Pedro Ximenez sherry. As I mentioned earlier, these grapes, the Pedro Ximenez grapes, are sun-dried, and so that concentrates the sugar, basically creates a raisin out of it. And so when you make the sherry, it's like straight up dessert wine. So there's no sugar added to these. Typically, it's just really, really sweet grapes that they're using to create the sherry. So we've got the Pedro Ximenez sherry. This is straight up syrup. It's syrupy, it's thick, dried fruit all the way. You get some of that nuttiness. If you like dessert wines, I mean, it has good flavor. It's just way too sweet for me. But if you like dessert wines, then definitely check out that one. Then we have cream sherries. Cream sherries are basically a blend. They're a blend of a dry sherry, typically Oloroso, but it could be any of the dries. And then they add some Pedro Ximenez to it to sweeten it a little bit and make it into a enjoyable sherry to drink. So there's 3 categories of cream sherries. You have pale cream, medium, and cream. I'm gonna start with the medium here. So this one is described as having a medium sweet Oloroso. So it uses an Oloroso, and then we're sweetening with, I'm assuming with Pedro Ximenez. Doesn't actually mention that on the back, but that's what they mainly are. So this is the medium cream sherry. So not all that sweet. It definitely has the characteristics of an Oloroso, the nuttiness, the rich dried fruit, but much sweeter. So this is either sweetened with Pedro Ximenez or simply with sugar, depending on the quality of the sherry. I like the dry sherries, but this is far more enjoyable drinking than straight up Pedro Ximenez, which is way too sweet. And lastly, the Harvey's Bristol Cream Sherry. It's funny, I've seen this one for years, I've never tried it, but it always seemed to me like the cheap sherry that you see in stores. However, if it's good enough for Fraser, it's good enough for me. Oh, damn!
Oh, not to worry, Dr. Crane. I'll have that spot cleaned up in no time.
which he was clearly seen buying a bottle of this in one of the episodes. I wonder if the producers knew about that, because Fraser being Fraser, you never think he would buy such an inexpensive sherry, and yet he was seen here. I feel like they just told the prop guy, go pick up a bottle of sherry, and he just grabbed the cheapest thing he could find. All right, Harvey's. So yeah, definitely, here, let's put it like that. Sweeter than the medium, not as sweet as the full Pedro, but again, not bad. This doesn't specify, it just says it's a blend of a bunch of sherries. So there might be some Oloroso, some Amontillado in there, and then some Pedro Ximenez to sweeten it up. Again, it's not bad. These two are definitely more enjoyable. This is straight up desserts. If you like that, then go for it. All right, let's talk sherry in cocktails. So sherry is often used in cocktails, mainly as a modifier, sometimes as your base ingredient, but rarely. But the main question that you have on your mind is, can you use substitutions? Do I need to buy 8 bottles in order to make sherry cocktails? And the answer is, it's complicated. In my experience, the main sherries used in cocktails are dry sherries. So you'll often see Fino sherry, Oloroso, and Amontillado. So actually, let's put it like that. Very dry, less dry, but a lot of richness, and then in the middle. So these, in my opinion, are definitely interchangeable. Obviously, if you use an Oloroso instead of a Fino, or vice versa, it's gonna change the complexity of the cocktail slightly, but it's not gonna completely destroy the cocktail. If you have to get just one, I recommend Amontillado, seeing as it literally in the middle of Fino and Oloroso. On the other hand though, there are cocktails that ask for Pedro Ximenez. You cannot substitute for a dry sherry. This, as I mentioned, is incredibly sweet. So a cocktail using Pedro Ximenez is counting on that richness, that sweetness. It's basically using this as a sweetener in the cocktail. So if you substitute a dry sherry, you're going to destroy the balance of the cocktail. So yeah, so if something's calling for Fino or Oloroso or Amontillado, you're safe using any of the dry sherries. But if a cocktail calls for Pedro Ximenez, you gotta use this, otherwise you're not gonna get that sweetness that it's looking for.
Dear God, we're out of sherry.
Well, and that's it, guys. That's your starter guide to sherry. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I hope I didn't make any mistakes. If I did, feel free to call me out in the comments down below. And hopefully for some of you, I've demystified sherry, and you start using it more in cocktails that you make, or you just start sipping on it neat, like Fraser does. And because I've started doing that, and there is a certain sophistication to it. And make sure you smash that like button and smash that subscribe button, because in the next video, we're going to be making sherry cocktails. Anyways, that's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Go out and buy yourself a couple bottles of sherry. Cheers.